Welcome to the Italian game. Today you'll learn the common plans, attacks, and traps of this opening. Start with e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, then white plays bishop to c4, marking the Italian game. The reason for this move is to develop the bishop and target black's vulnerable pawn on f7. In some variations, this can be problematic for black, especially if white advances the knight to increase pressure on the pawn. The threat becomes real quickly. What can black play here? Black's two most common moves are developing a minor piece, either the knight or bishop, and preparing to castle kingside. We'll discuss these moves shortly. In addition to these classical moves, black can try more aggressive and trickier options, which you should be prepared to counter to avoid getting trapped and losing the game early. One such attempt is playing pawn to d6. This move allows black to sidestep the extensive opening theory of the Italian game and aim for simpler play. You can then develop your other knight, putting pressure on black. If black casually develops their knight, which seems natural, it's actually a blunder, as it allows the move knight to g5. Now you coordinate an attack on the pawn on f7, and black has no way to defend, leaving them in a losing position after just 5 moves. Notice that black's knight on f6 blocks the queen's diagonal, making your move knight to g5 possible. Let's go back. What else can black play? In most cases, they'll bring out their bishop to pin your knight. This move feels natural for black, as it puts pressure on your knight. To counter, you can play h3 to force the bishop to decide. If black retreats the bishop to maintain the pin, they keep the pressure. If they choose to exchange, you simply recapture. This move also creates a threat of scholar's checkmate on f7. Generally, a bishop is slightly stronger than a knight in chess. This exchange works in your favor, so things are looking good. If instead black retreats their bishop to h5 to maintain the pin, there's a brilliant combination. The move is knight takes e5, which will likely shock your opponent. Not only do you ignore the pin, but you also sacrifice your queen. If black captures your queen, they fall into bishop takes f7 check, followed by knight to d5 checkmate. This punishes black for neglecting their kingside development and failing to castle early. If your opponent decides not to take the queen and instead plays knight takes e5, you can see why it was crucial to first play h3 to push the bishop back to h5. Now you can capture the bishop with your queen. If the bishop were still on g4, this wouldn't be possible because the knight would protect it and the entire combination would fall apart. But since the bishop is on h5, you can safely take it. Black might then think they can capture another piece, but not so fast. After queen to b5, you deliver a double attack. Black must cover their king, and with queen takes c4, you regain material. Now you're up a pawn, ahead in development, and in a technically winning position. Another tricky attempt from black is knight to d4, known as the Blackburn Shilling Gambit. This gambit is fairly popular, and you're likely to encounter it occasionally. Black's idea is to bait you into taking the pawn on e5, which seems undefended. However, if you fall for it, black responds with queen to g5, creating a double attack and putting you in a difficult position. For instance, if white plays knight takes on f7, which initially looks like a winning move by forking the queen, and rook, black has a strong counterblow with queen takes g2. This creates a double attack on the rook and the pawn, while putting white's king in serious trouble. If white decides to capture the rook anyway, black responds with queen to h1, threatening an almost checkmate. The king has no forward moves, forcing white to undevelop the bishop to block. After queen takes c4 with check, followed by bishop to e2, and knight takes c2 with another check, black quickly finishes the game. So how do you punish black for trying to trap you this way? The simple solution is to avoid capturing the pawn on e5. Instead, you can castle, keeping your king and the pawn on g2 perfectly safe. Knight takes c5 is now a real threat, and in most cases, black will trade knights. At this point, you're clearly ahead. You've developed 2 pieces, castled, and taken control of the position, while black has accomplished very little. Plus, your threatening queen takes f7 for checkmate, forcing black to defend. In response, you can play pawn to d4, sacrificing the pawn. If black captures, you respond with pawn to e5, threatening the same scholar's checkmate, but in a more justified way. Now the knight is under attack and cannot move, as doing so allows queen takes f7 checkmate. Black's only way to fight back is by playing pawn to d5, attacking your bishop while you attack their knight. You're happy to go for this line because it leaves black's king very exposed, giving you a strong advantage. At this point, you have another strong option. Bishop to g5. The idea is to set up a discovered attack. If black plays a careless move, such as h6, you can respond with pawn takes g6, a powerful move that attacks the queen while also preparing to capture the rook and promote to a new queen. This would be disastrous for black. What can black do instead? They can't trade on f6 because it leads to a double attack, ensuring you win material. The most logical move for black is g6 to stay in the game, but this exposes their king. You can immediately capitalize on this with rook to e1 check. If the bishop blocks, the position becomes a puzzle for you to solve. Take a moment to think. Can you find the winning move for white? Another tricky gambit for black is the move pawn to f5, known as the Russo Gambit. This gambit is especially effective in blitz games and can yield great results for black. Black's strategy is to attack the pawn on e4, essentially playing a reversed king's gambit. If white accepts the pawn sacrifice, black responds with pawn to e4. This puts white's knight in a tough spot, as it has no good squares to move to. It can't go forward due to black's queen, and it can't go to the center because black's knight controls those squares. If white retreats the knight to its starting position, it becomes a passive move, allowing black to develop a strong attack. The best way for white to handle this is by playing knight to d4, keeping the position active and avoiding passivity. A possible counter trap for white is to sacrifice the knight, which might seem like a risky move at first, but can actually be a clever tactic. The idea behind the sacrifice is to create a strong attack by opening up the board and removing black's key defenses. However, black has a simple and effective response to this. By playing knight to f6, black covers the important square and keeps the game balanced, leading to a normal, approximately equal position. This is a solid defense that prevents white from exploiting the sacrificed knight and keeps the game in a healthy state for black. On the other hand, if your opponent is not aware of the trap and impulsively captures the knight on d4, they are in trouble. White's move after this would be queen to h5. This is the whole purpose of the knight sacrifice, to clear the diagonal for the queen and remove black's knight from a key defensive square. By doing so, white opens up a direct line of attack, and the situation becomes much more dangerous for black. This sequence could lead to a winning position for white, taking advantage of black's oversight. This situation leads to a very interesting tactical battle, but white ultimately gains the upper hand. After checking black, the position forces black to find a way to cover, but white captures the pawn. White is still threatening to advance the pawn on the next move, which would open up a discovered check. Black attempts a counterattack, but white sacrifices the queen, knowing that it can be regained immediately with interest, capturing black's rook in the process. Despite this, the battle isn't over yet, as black can play knight to c2, creating a fork. As I mentioned, this is a really bloody battle, and white must respond carefully. White counters the knight, but the knight happily grabs the rook. For a moment, it seems like the position is still tense. However, after white plays queen to h7, it becomes clear that white is now attacking the knight while also putting pressure on black's exposed king. This combination of factors allows white to seize the advantage. For example, if black moves the knight back, white can deliver queen to f7, setting up a very advanced scholar's mate. At this point, the game is essentially decided in white's favor. Thanks for watching this video till end. If you found this video helpful, then like and subscribe the channel.